This is the Fen Get-In. The day started off by giving a briefing to the rest of the production team before we'd even started the get-in. I gathered the whole production team together and did a briefing so that everyone was aware about what needs doing and what time allocations were for the day. This then makes sure that everyone's aware of everything that needs to be completed and what time they need to be completed by. In this briefing I also went through the health and safety of the get-in, including making sure everyone had their steel-toe cap boots on and making sure that everyone who was entering the theatre had a hard hat. This is really important as during the get-in there are many risks and they were included in my risk assessment, but I believe that it was beneficial to remind people of the health and safety of the get-in, what they need to make sure to do to make sure that everyone is safe during this get-in and so that it will be completed without any health and safety issues. I also went over any specific jobs certain members of the production team had to complete by certain times and allocated these jobs within the team. Overall, the briefing was very successful as it set us up for the day and we were able to start straight away afterwards, and everyone knew what they needed to do, making sure the whole production team started the day off on the same page. Before we started the Get In for Fen, we needed to complete a get out of the show that was in the theatre before, working. This was really important as we needed to make sure that everything was up before we could start rigging and before we could start the LX get-in, as we required the fixtures that were being used in this show. This didn't take too long as we got it done within the hour that I allocated. This meant that we were sticking to the schedule that I had created. While this was happening, certain people were finishing off final details that needed to be done before the set get-in later on that day. This included painting and dry brushing the crates and boxes that were used for working, as we were also using these for Fen, so we needed to repaint them so that we could get them ready to be used. After the get out of working, we started the LX fit up for Fen. This was where the LX designer took charge and showed everyone what needed to happen and where everything needed to go. During this get-in I was making sure that all of the final little details of the set had been completed. This also included making sure that the little details of the tractor with the middle of the wheels needed to be reattaching as we took them off prior so that we could attach the bolts. This was completed quickly and effectively while the LX get-in was happening. It gave us perfect time to complete all the little details and the little jobs that need to be done before the set could be put into the space. The LX fit up was very successful as I was able to oversee everything, making sure that everything was completed and fit up safely and effectively. I helped the fit up doing whatever the LX designers required me to do at that time, along with making sure that everything was being completed successfully and that they were sticking to the schedule that I'd created. During the LX get-in, I made sure that they knew what the priority bars were, as I could get LX 3 to 5 and the undergallery completed first, as while they were doing the rest, we could be started to put up the steel deck, giving us more time to put up the steel deck correctly and make sure that the steel deck is safe and secure for the actors to use. Overall, the LX get-in was very successful, however it did take more time than I allocated, meaning that once they were done we were running a little behind schedule, but I'd rather it being done correctly and taken a little more time than people rushing and it being done wrong, meaning that it would then push us even further behind because we would have to rectify mistakes. Once the back of LX bars were completed, we started to put up the steel deck. To put up the steel deck and the scaffolding, we used a podger and a spanner to tighten all the bolts to make sure that they were done securely and that the clamps were secure on the bars correctly. This is really important as the scaffolding needs to be safe and secure for the actors to use and for the set to be able to put on these platforms. Once the scaffolding and steel deck were up, we had to make sure that everything was safely attached and attach the stairs and the poles to the ladders. This is really important as the actors need to be able to access the steel deck. I made sure that there was railings on the steel deck for health and safety reasons as the steel deck was above 4 feet high and therefore requires a railing. The ladders and the stairs also had railings to make sure that the actors were safe while using them. This means that there are less likely to be any injuries by the cast while going up and down these ladders. This also means that it matches my risk assessment that I made earlier on in the process. I also made sure that the clamps and supports were properly attached and were secure. This is so that the steel deck is safe for people to stand on and means that therefore that the actors will be able to act on these properly. Overall, the steel deck went up without any real problems. It was safe and secure, and once the stairs were added it looked like the ground plans that I designed but with the set designer. Once the steel deck was up, I started to bring in the flats so that they could get into the required positions and secure those to the braces behind the steel deck. I constantly communicated with the scenic designer to make sure that all the flats were being placed in the correct places and matching her vision and her designs. When putting in the middle flat with the rabbit hutch door, it was slightly too big to fit between the two front pieces of steel deck. If this didn't end up working, it means that the whole scene in the production would not work. I grabbed a mallet and moved the two front pieces of steel deck a few centimetres away both sides. This made it so the flat would fit, and when pushing it in with the mallet, it made sure that it was in the correct place. Then securing it to the steel deck like I did the other flats. To get the flats on the steel deck, we lifted them up through and pushed them underneath the bars of the steel deck, then centering them back up meant that we could secure them to the bracing. It was really important that we secured the bracing, as it needed to make sure that the flats were secure and they wouldn't fall on anyone on the steel deck or would fall below off the steel deck. This is really important for health and safety purposes. Once the flats were secured into position, we realised that either side of the steel deck there was a gap underneath the steel deck that would be visible to the audience. This would then ruin the illusion of the whole performance, as it would take away from the escapism that the director wanted to create for her production. I then came up with the idea to put hessian material over the sides, as this would cover the gap and the audience wouldn't be able to see the cast as they move around behind the scene and get into positions underneath the steel deck. This would also keep the rabbit hutch door scene looking the way the director wanted, as otherwise you could see the actor after they'd been pushed into the rabbit hutch door when they're not meant to be seen. This is really important, as this scene is one of the big scenes in the production. Now that the flats were in position, we had to get the tractor and the troughs into the theatre. Before the troughs could go into the theatre, however, I needed to fill them up with soil and potatoes so they were ready for the cast to be able to use, and doing this before taking them into the theatre meant that we weren't getting dirt and mud all over the stage, while people were still trying to get the flats into the right places and finish the LX get-in. Putting the dirt in the troughs really made it look realistic and made sure that they had the same tech, as they needed to make sure they could actually throw and catch the potatoes when they had dirt on them. We also put the tractor into the space and put the final finishing touches on the tractor. This included putting MDF in the middle of the tractor tyres and also adding metal bolts so that it made it look more realistic. This then finally added the finishing touches and further emphasised the fact that it was meant to represent a tractor. This was very successful. After seeing the tractor in the space with the rest of the set, it really fit in, and the aesthetic that the set designer and the director envisioned for the whole production. Once all the flats were in position and the tractor and the trough had been brought in, I started on the set dressing and placing props that needed to be placed into certain places due to the blocking that I had previously seen and recorded down. I made sure to be constantly communicating with the scenic designer to make sure that all of the props were going in places she wanted them, and that I was constantly matching her vision. I made sure to put all the props that were part of scenes in the correct places that they needed to, making sure that there was a phone stage left on top of the steel deck, as this is used during the transition between scenes 3 and 4. I also needed to make sure that there was enough space on stage left corner so for the tractor to be placed after scene 3, as it's stored there for the remainder of the show. This is really important, as if it didn't fit there wasn't enough space for them to then move it, and the transition wouldn't work. Therefore, the tractor would not be able to come off the stage correctly and would be stuck on stage for the remainder of the show. Once the big props were put into place, I started to do the set dressing, making sure that everything was in the correct place and matching the set designer's vision for the set. The set dressing and the additional props were put into the props cage on Friday before, so that it would be easy for everything to go into the theatre and the set dressing to be in one place. The set designer had already okayed all of these props, so it just meant that we could put them straight onto the set. This meant that we were saving time for the get-in, but also the set designer's props were matching the set designer's vision, and this is one of the most important things, that we're constantly matching the designs and their vision. Overall, the get-in day was very successful. We managed to do the whole get-in by the end of the day, and this meant that we were able to start tech the next day. However, we did run behind schedule after the lighting get-in, as it took slightly longer than planned. This meant that we had to work quicker to catch up in time, but we managed to catch up, and by the end of the day we were back on schedule, meaning that tech could start as planned with the cast on the next day.